Dr. Zhivago, it changed my life. That's what I said to him. I said it so quietly, I don't think he even heard me. Perhaps everywhere he went, he heard people mumbling the titles of his films so that he eventually just tuned them out as part of the background of his life. He carried them with him wherever he went, I imagine, the constant murmur of gasps that belied recognition and the sounds of people convulsively saying his name or the name of one of more of his movies. I didn't care, however, because for me it was different. Other people may have enjoyed his movies or wanted to take a picture with him, but I wasn't them. I wasn't a fan. I wasn't a sycophant. I didn't want a picture with him. I didn't want to talk about his career or his challenges in Hollywood, although perhaps I should have. But in that moment, I didn't, because I felt special. I saw myself as a child. I was his metaphoric offspring. He had given birth to me. So I said it again, a little louder and clearer this time, with more confidence, supporting my voice with my diaphragm like I had learned in acting school, to rise above the din of the Manhattan rooftop. Dr. Zhivago, it changed my life. He turned to me, suddenly realizing that this young cocktail waiter was saying something more than, "Can I get you another?" He looked at my dim-witted expression. I'd surprised myself as much as I'd surprised him, and I had no plan of action for the moment after contact was made, and contact had been made. A smile began to dawn on his cheekbones and in his eyes, and I knew I had disturbed him from his conversation, and I also knew that this was against the rules, and I could very easily be fired for my brazenness. But again, I didn't care. This was my moment. I had penetrated him the way he had penetrated me so many years ago, and the truth is, I had no idea what to say next. You see, for me, it all started in the summer of 1977, when, as a young boy, I announced to my parents that I had decided to become an actor. I announced to my mother after watching an episode of Happy Days, you know, the one where Fonzie tries to be a normal person like Richie Cunningham and fails miserably. I always somehow related to Fonzie, not because he was cool, which he most certainly was, but because his name was Arthur Fonzarelli. And in spite of having what I thought in my limited 11-year-old knowledge of name origins was the most unusual name other than mine, he had turned it into the epitome of coolness. So with the actual belief that acting involved wearing a leather jacket and riding a motorcycle around Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I decided that afternoon that I was indeed destined to go from Aasif Mandvi to the Mons. My mom just sat there with an ice bag upon her head. Her eyes were closed and she made no sound at all. I didn't know it back then, but my mother was suffering from one of her recurring migraines, partially brought about by the fact that my friend Sean and I had spent the last 3.5 hours driving tanks through the dining room and had quite successfully defended our modest 3-bedroom bungalow from a river of molten lava, an alien invasion, and 332 tiny green soldiers. But I persisted in my quest for a response. So I yelled at the top of my lungs, "I want to be an actor, Mom!" Now, my mother has only ever said 2 things to me as a child that I didn't understand. The first was, "Why do you have to go out to play?" And the second was about to come out of her mouth. She opened her eyes, and sounding and even looking remarkably like Yoda, she said the following words, "Like Omar Sharif." Now, I had no idea what my mother was saying. I assumed Omar Sharif was someone we knew, probably the son of some other Indian family. And my parents were always comparing my behavior and success to the behavior and success of other Indian children that they knew. Sunil doesn't talk to his mother that way, or Munir always helps his parents with the groceries. It was the perfect inadequacy monitor that could be turned on at any moment when you were feeling pretty good about yourself. If I brought home B's, Shireen had brought home A's. If I was told to take out the garbage, Raj didn't have to be told, he just did it. If I helped my dad clean the garage, Milan had cleaned the garage when his parents were on vacation so that it would be a surprise for them when they returned. So naturally, I assumed that once again, my mother was resorting to inadequacy tactics by bringing up this Omar Sharif kid, who had no doubt had probably aced the entrance examination to our local grammar school and had won an Oscar for acting while doing it. This time I thought it's not going to work. My mother would not inadequate my parade, and so I recoiled at the name and said reactively, I hate that kid, I've met him and I don't like him. Now my mother began to laugh, and as she stroked my hair while my eyes burned from the reeking tiger balm that she smeared all across her forehead, she told me I didn't know him. But if I wanted to be an actor, I should be like him. I didn't much understand why my mother kept harping on this overachieving kid, but I knew I had to counter with something, so I responded with the one thing that I knew would make my mother realize the kind of actor I wanted to be. No, Mom, I said, I want to be like the Fonz. And then I stood up, put my thumbs at right angles, and with the deepest, sexiest voice that an 11-year-old could muster, while wearing polyester red shorts, I gave her the hey. It was a long, drawn-out hey, like Fonzie did. I held it for a good 10 seconds until my breath ran out, just to the point that I might need my asthma inhaler. When I was done, the room was silent, and then, like an explosion, my mother burst into fits of laughter. I hadn't intended for that reaction. Perhaps I was expecting her to be impressed or flabbergasted at my dead-on impression, but instead she just laughed and laughed. And after she was done laughing, she said something that haunted me for the next several months. Omar Sharif is better than Fonz. And that sent me into a tailspin. Would nothing make this woman see that I didn't want to be associated with this Omar Sharif kid? He sounded like a jerk, and there was no way that he was better than the Fonz. Was she out of her mind? For the next several months, it did seem that everywhere I went, I was plagued with the name of this Omar Sharif character, and it seemed to upstage my brand new declaration of wanting to be an actor. As I proudly announced to my asthma doctor between deep breaths that I wanted to be an actor, he seemed to perk up while removing his stethoscope, and before my father could even get out the words, no, my son will go to medical school, the friendly Indian doctor had already said the thing that I could not escape from. You want to be an actor, is it? Like Omar Sharif! I was devastated. No, not like Omar Sharif. Why did everyone think Omar Sharif was such a big deal? The bus driver, the woman at the grocery store, even when the guy who would come to inspect our gas meter seemed impressed with my ambition and swore that his brother had met Steve McQueen getting out of a taxi on their trip to New York City, my mother had to interfere and interject by telling him that I would not be like Steve McQueen, but like Omar Sharif, to which the gas meter inspector almost cracked his skull on the pipes under our sink as he stood up so fast saying, Omar Sharif, oh, he's my wife's favorite. Since this was many years before the internet and videotape recorders, and I was 11 and couldn't even leave the house by myself, there was no way for me to see a picture of this Omar Sharif kid. What did he look like? What school did he go to? Why was everyone so obsessed with him? I let my mind wander and had fantasies of me and Omar Sharif meeting on the playground, and I would punch him right in the nose, and he'd go crying to his mother. He was probably fat and arrogant because everyone loved him so much. I would defeat this kid, I thought to myself, if I ever saw him. And then one day, not very soon after that, I did. It was Christmas Eve, 1978, and we were at a friend's house, another Indian family with kids who were older than me, but we played together because our parents played cards together every Sunday. The living room of the tiny house was packed with brown faces, aunts and uncles from 4 or 10 different families, and their kids all sitting around one small television set. It was time for the main event. We were all going to watch the BBC movie of the night. The MGM lion roared and the music began to crescendo. My mother handed out handkerchiefs and Indian snacks to the captive audience, and as I sat there, having been dragged up from the basement away from Anil's Formula One race car tracks, where for once I was actually winning, I heard something that I never dreamt I would hear. The BBC announcer announced the movie for the evening. Yes, they actually used to do that. And as he said the words, something happened not unlike when Roy Scheider finally sees the shark on that crowded beach. A technique that Spielberg invented for that very moment, where the camera in my mind's eye dollied backwards while the focus zoomed forwards as I heard the words, Dr. Zhivago, starring Omar Sharif. Are you kidding me? I thought. You have got to be kidding me. But this was no joke. And I have to admit that for the minute the movie began, the lens in my mind's eye returned to its optimum focus as I finally understood what everyone had been talking about for so long. Now, I don't remember the movie in great detail now, but that night, as the Indian snacks were passed and children got up and ran crying into their mother's arms and old Indian men passed out on the sofa while others half played gin rummy on a blanket laid out on the floor, I sat there mesmerized. Not watching a war movie or a love story, but watching my dream. Watching the possibility of my dream coming true in the face of a man who dare not look like any man I'd ever seen in an English-speaking film. Not a servant or a native like in Tarzan movies, not a Gunga Din or a Bedouin like I'd seen in so many British and Hollywood films, but a gentleman, a brown gentleman who was kissing Julie Christie and whose accent said more about the character than his ethnicity. So many years later, when I first arrived in New York City and I carried my Screen Actors Guild card in my back pocket, the only words that came out of my mouth were, "Dr. Zhivago, it changed my life." And in the din of that rooftop cocktail lounge, he smiled, nodded, and said quietly, "Really? Mine too." I laughed as I walked away so as not to be seen conversing with the guest by my floor manager, and I understood two things: why I used to go out and play, and why Omar Sharif was better than Fonz. Thank you.